Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. So my name is Fatima, and I will be moderating our event. So the title of our event is Work Environments for the Neurodiverse People, happening both here at EPFL, and also we have people joining us online. For people joining us online, in case you have questions during the event, please do send your questions to wellbeing@epfl.ch. We will be taking your question at the end of the panel. So for the next hour, we're going to hear from experts and but also from students here at EPFL who are going to share their testimonies on neurodiversity and work environment. So I have here with me 4 panelists, Mrs. Nora Gappert, Dr. Krieger, Dr. Weber, Mrs. Jessica Pay from the EPFL, and Nathalie Bouy, who is going to share her story and her testimony. So at the end of the presentation, we were going to take 15 minutes for questions and answers from the audience here and also online. So I hand over to Nora. So let's dive in. Nora, you're a psychologist specialized in neurodevelopmental conditions, and you especially work with children and adolescents. So to open this event, can you please tell us what is exactly neurodiversity?
Yes. Thank you, Fatima. So I have the task to introduce to you a little bit what neurodiversity means. So I'll dive right into it since we only have a short amount of time. Okay, so the term neurodiversity, it was inspired by, the word biodiversity. Biodiversity refers to the variety and variability of life on Earth, right? And just like biodiversity, neurodiversity refers to the variety of neurological functioning that we can find in different brains. In other words, it refers to the differences in the way that the brain functions that impact people's strengths and weaknesses. And these differences in the brain functioning can affect the way people think, process, learn, and behave. Two other words that are quite important are neurotypical or neuroatypical. So the majority have a brain that functions, I guess, in a quite similar manner. But 1 in 7 people are what we call neurotypical or neurodivergent, meaning their brains function different to this previously mentioned majority, I guess, of neurotypicals. Oof, well, it wasn't supposed to be so pink. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term. Yeah, so it means that it regroups a lot of different diagnoses. What all of these diagnoses have in common is that they are neurodevelopmental. It means that we are born with them. So it's an innate way of functioning that neurodiverse or neurodivergent people present with. So these can be just some examples. So neurodevelopmental language disorders, it can be the different types of learning disorders like dyslexia or dyscalculia. Intellectual disability also falls under this umbrella, as well as Tourette's. But we quite often, I guess, talk about ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and autism spectrum disorder. Some people say, and I guess it's kind of true, we all kind of fall under the neurodiversity umbrella. We all can have traits from these different conditions. But for the sake of today's presentation, I'm just referring more to the diagnoses, the neurodevelopmental diagnoses. These ways of functioning that can then result in diagnoses come with challenges, but I like to tell especially my small patients that they also come with some type of superpowers, so great strength. For example, people who have ADHD, well, while they can be quite impulsive and hyperactive, and maybe quite easily dispersed and distracted. On the other hand, they have loads of energy and passion. They're very creative, and they can hyper-focus and get things done in like 8 hours at once, if they're interested in it. Another example can be autism or Asperger's syndrome. Well, people who are on the autism spectrum, while they may have problems with social and communication and social interaction, and they might have very specific obsessive interests, but on the other hand, they can be super efficient workers because they are, well, very detail-oriented, and they get things done within the rules that are asked of them, so much so that there are certain workforces that are now searching for people who are on the spectrum to hire them specifically for their companies, like in Silicon Valley, for example. I want to look at a couple of these different challenges, however, that can occur throughout, well, different diagnoses that can fall under the neurodiversity umbrella. One big challenge that a lot of my adolescents also talk to me about are the sensory ones, because people who are on the autism spectrum suffer from sensory hypersensitivity quite often, and so it means that they are more sensitive to light and sound and all the background noises, and they may have difficulty filtering out sensory information. So right now we've got the background noise of the cafeteria, we're trying to focus on this, and so someone who's on the spectrum will not be able to listen to my voice, but they might be listening to everyone else, and that can be the same for ADHD. And so it's very appropriate to talk about this in like a university context. And this hypersensitivity can lead to sensory overload, which unfortunately can then result in like some sort of anxiety or panic attack, and students cannot attend certain events because of this. Another challenge that neurodiverse people can present with is executive functioning. Those are skills that are situated within our frontal lobe of the brain, and they affect organization, planning, memory and concentration, time management and flexibility. Basically everything you kind of need at university. For example, time management in order to get your essay in on time, organization and planning to set up your schedule for the year, to know what prerequisites to take in the first year to be able to go into the second year. Things that I found challenging without having a diagnosis, and so I can only imagine how much more challenging this can be for our neurodivergent population. The last set of challenges are the communication or interaction challenges. These can lead to difficulty integrating socially, especially, well, when we get to university, often we don't know many people, and that can result in isolation. These communication challenges also impact group work, can lead to difficulties understanding each other, knowing how to effectively communicate in a group. And all of these challenges lead to, well, I just put in a few statements, but they lead to some consequences. So unfortunately now, neurodiverse people are more likely to develop mental health issues like anxiety and depression, and this is often why I receive them in my consultation. Is not because they're on the autism spectrum, but they've developed as a consequence mental health issues. Neurodiverse people are also more likely to feel like they're not good enough. They can be more likely to be socially isolated, as I mentioned before. And they can actually be more likely to be denied access to academic studies because they don't have the prerequisites, or they don't know how to sign up independently. And then they're also more likely to actually drop out of university because it's too hard and the environment isn't yet maybe well adapted enough. But the good news are that neurodiverse people are more likely to succeed in a well-adapted environment, and this is why we're here today and talking about this, and I believe my colleagues are going to speak more on this in research terms also later. Now, in order to illustrate a little bit why this adaptation is really important, and we don't want to pathologize that much anymore, but rather talk about adaptation, I tried to find a metaphor, and I found one online that spoke to me because it's about redheads, and for obvious reasons, this spoke to me. And so it says that, well, redheads, we all know, yeah, I have a problem with the sun. And so when I was a child, well, I was always told I had to be careful going into the sun. I needed to wear my sun hat, my sunscreen, stay in the shade. Otherwise, I could get a big sunburn and later in life develop skin cancer. And so no one told me I should stop being a redhead, cure my redheadism, but rather they put in place protective measures so I could continue living healthy, happy life and still go to the beach if I wanted to. And this should be the same for our neurodivergent population. So rather than telling them, oh, you should cure your ADHD or you should just be less autistic, well, why don't we put in place the right protective mechanisms to also allow them a happy and healthy life in those environments, to also be able to go to the beach, I guess, and have this on screen. And in a university context, well, this could look like if there's a sensory challenge, if there's hypersensitivity, maybe we could allow people to wear noise-canceling headphones or to attend certain classes online rather than going to the big lecture hall if it's like a 200 people kind of class. For the organizational difficulties, maybe there could be assistance provided, there could be a certain entry into the university course that's a little bit facilitated, and therefore help people have more access to university studies. So rather than trying to find a cure, we want to adapt the environment to basically put people who come from this neurodivergent population to have this way of functioning on the same level as others. It isn't to get them ahead, but to just level up. And this also already brings me to my conclusion, which is that in summary, neurodiversity is an evidence-based concept that recognizes the natural diversity of neurological characteristics in the human population and that challenges the pathologization of neurodivergent traits. And it advocates for respect, inclusion, and support for all individuals, regardless of their neurology. It emphasizes the importance of evidence-based approaches and societal changes to foster a more equitable, inclusive world for neurodivergent individuals, which, well, I'm so happy that we're doing this today, first step. All right, thank you, and that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Nora. So now that we understand what we're talking about, now that we understand what neurodiversity is and what falls under the so-called diversity umbrella, we're going to hear from two experts on inclusive workplace environments, Dr. Clara Kleber and Dr. Beat Krieger. So Clara, you are an environmental psychologist and also an architect. And you, Beat, you're an occupational therapist. I think it's a perfect transition to what you're saying, Nora, on mechanism and also creating inclusive workplaces. So can you two please introduce us to the Care for Rare project?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us in the first place. We would like to talk today about our recent project Care for Rare, for which we evaluated the scientific evidence of the usefulness of physical workplace adjustments to support neurodivergent workers in the office. And we are a team of international researchers from different universities and disciplines, including, as was already said, environmental and occupational psychology, but also occupational therapy. And today, Beate Krieger and I will lead you through the project. So first of all, why have we undertaken this evidence review in the first place? Well, the issue is that neurodivergent individuals have been systematically excluded from the labor market. That's an acknowledged fact by now. And that's partially because of their special sensory needs, as we've already heard about, and the lack of response at work to these sensory needs. And these sensory needs include hyper and hyperreactivity to sensory input from the environment, which means being over or understimulated by the environment. And these two sensitivity states have been mostly acknowledged in autistic individuals, but we have also seen this in reports now about populations with ADHD, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. So hence it's quite unsurprising that sensory difficulties of neurodivergent workers have been reported in office environments, especially in open plan environments. And these issues include being sensitive to noise, artificial light, temperature, smells, textures of surfaces, but also social input, such as the closeness of others. However, empirical research mostly reports on challenges of individuals with autism and mostly focuses also on hypersensitivity. So the evidence base is still a bit unbalanced. So we are in the starting phase to gather evidence. Industry research, like this here by HOK, supports these findings by pointing out to background chatter being distracting movements of others. So also here we have social input. Visual stress, like lines or patterns in the environment, but also heightened internal body sensation relating to discomfort caused by the environment. So experiencing that on a much different level. So you might ask, what are the consequences of unmet sensory needs then of a non-adjusted workplace? Why should we care? Well, the consequences of unmet sensory needs are likely to be varied and severe. However, sadly, there's not much robust academic evidence at the moment. As I said, we're at the beginning. The little evidence available suggests that hypersensitivity, again, so being overstimulated by the environment, is linked to loss of concentration and performance, but is also linked to reduced physiological health, such as headaches and migraines, but also nausea, so feeling sick. But also there's evidence about reduced psychological health, such as constant emotional distress or experiencing anxiety or anger. And ultimately, this threat to health and productivity is also a threat to workplace inclusion and successful employment in the end. So what adjustments are currently in use or in place? So for children, sensory adjustments that promote optimal arousal appear to be much more widely applied and well researched. However, in the work domain, researchers have indicated that adjustments overall, so not just about the work environment, the physical space, but also about job design or communication style, policies, things like that, are very poorly implemented, and also their efficacy is poorly understood overall. So despite the unclear evidence base, what we've just seen about the sensory needs of neurodivergent workers in workplaces, despite the not well-established evidence base about unmet needs consequences in terms of health and work productivity, we still see that the workplace design industry puts forward very specific design solutions. And although this is a positive trend and a growing mindfulness within the design industry to build inclusive workplaces, the usefulness of these concrete solutions is quite unclear. And I stand with this quote, as we can see here: the overarching issue of lack of social inclusion and equality creates a moral imperative to ensure that any adjustments are substantiated by evidence and guiding theoretical framework. So there is quite clearly a need to identify the evidence base for these solutions that address sensory needs. Hence, we took a focused evaluation of the available academic literature. And therefore, our review examined the following research question: what is the evidence base in terms of extent, nature, and quality for physical workplace adjustments to support occupational longevity, performance, health and well-being in neurodivergent workers as of their specific sensory needs?
So as this was scientific work, we needed a theoretical framework. We used the interdisciplinary framework and theory from environmental psychology and disability study. We adhere to PRISM guidelines and searched literature in 5 databases and hand-searched. We included evidence of adult office workers that clinically clinically were diagnosed neurodivergent, and we also included their families, colleagues, employers, experts, or vocational program managers. So we wanted to be really inclusive. And we included all studies that at least had one physical adjustment. And finally, we found 319 studies, not a lot in research, and out of that, only 20 had our inclusion criteria. So the results, what we found. The academic literature we found was insufficient. And there was insufficient evidence to support the usefulness of adjustments, and that not because of the adjustments, but because of methodological shortcomings. Many of the studies were qualitative, asking people about their experience, rather than testing whether physical adjustments make a difference. So this is a problem, because without robust study, we can't say what's cause and what's effect. So far, we can mostly say that to most student participations, they believe that some adjustments helped themselves, but this is not systematically. And most of the study also didn't make a research into a systematical aspect. For example, all senses are hypo and hypersensitivity. And last, the evidence we found were mainly for people within the autism spectrum disorder. So rarely no other research into the field. Here are some of our results. It might be clear for you, but most adjustment addressed sound destruction and visual sensitivity. We are here in this beautiful room. We have a lot of visual things and sounds also. So you see auditory things, you can read yourself, visual, tactile things. Then there were also the question of social stimulation. This was very often mentioned, for example, avoiding traditional open plan offices or offering withdrawal places or adjusting social break rooms. And here to support interaction. So we found it very interesting that it's a misconcept that social stimulation has to be reduced, but they are definitely desired, and physical adjustments to make it possible are desired. In relation to this, it was a kind of side effect. We also wanted to point to psychosocial adjustments, especially for persons in the autism spectrum disorder. They asked for another communication style in job tasks. They want more inclusivity, and they ask for another workplace routine that might be helpful for them. And we can discuss that field further. So important adjustments is also to provide control. Control over lighting, sound, smell, temperature, control over own space. That means, for example, adjustable furniture or own corner, and control over your own location. Where do you want to study? Where do you want to work? And this choice gives a sense of freedom, and this is very important. So several authors pointed to cautions when applying adjustments. For example, there need to be a case-to-case consideration. It is not possible one size fits all. And there is also a rule: don't only apply physical adjustments without addressing psychosocial factors. we need to have appropriate workplaces and personal policy connected to it, not only making the physical adjustments. And we need training to get more knowledgeable line managers, employers, to understand the factors of disability of these people, and to understand also the adjustments. And otherwise, we make expectations that will not be relieved or fulfilled, and then everybody is frustrated. So to conclude, we have 4 things. First, research in physical workplaces adjustments is really underdeveloped. Secondly, most research is on individuals with ASD, and we need more inclusive neurodiverse samplings. And we highlighted through this small research we did that there is no one size that fits all. So we need case-by-case considerations. And lastly, and this is very important, the reality is that inclusive workplaces are good for everybody. Everybody experiences sometimes some overload, and sensory healthy workplaces are a public health issue. So at the moment, we only have heuristic, some ideas, and they are put into places by the industry, but a real lack of research is missing. So Clara now will continue.
So hence, as the evidence base is so very bad, we would like to point out the next steps in our research once we secured funding for that. So first of all, we need to create a better evidence base overall. This means, so we've split this up now in 4 parts. So first of all, we need to develop a clear understanding of the different sensory needs of all the different neurodivergent types, including all the different sensory modalities and including hypo and hypersensitivity. And you're doing this by using robust study designs, not just qualitative designs or descriptive studies. Secondly, afterwards, we need to understand the consequences, the work-specific consequences in terms of health and performance of a non-adjusted workplace from an employer and an employee perspective. Yeah? So build an evidence-based case. Thirdly, we would suggest that we critically evaluate these the evidence base of these beautiful design guidelines, because as we saw in our review, they can't be based on academic literature. So what are they actually based on? So we need to find that out. And then fourthly, we need to bit by bit implement rigorous experimental designs to test the usefulness of these very specific design solutions. And all of this is necessary for the development of future evidence-based design guidelines that actually allow us for quality control and any kinds of claims in terms of return on investment. So, and as you might ask yourself, how do these design guidelines look like that are not yet evidence-based? I brought some examples. So here you see hypersensitive. These are 2 different kind of areas that are suggested. A hypersensitive area with very low stimulating and a low stimulating environment, and a highly stimulating environment for someone who's in a hypersensitive state. This one suggests different zones, depending by different work activities, such as concentrated work or collaborative work, and offers this in a hypersensitive and a hypersensitive version, as you can see here by the color codes. And this one is very concrete solutions for concentrated work for a hyposensitivity state in pink on the left-hand side, and a hypersensitivity state with blue bullet points on the right-hand side. And I can already see 1-2 things that I would actually challenge. So yeah, that's how this looks like at the moment. And we would also like you to, as we said, the evidence base is so very bad. We would like to point out some empirically grounded resources for the moment.
So first of all, our paper of the Care for Rare project is published as an open access paper, so everyone can download this if you're interested. But then we would also like to point out from our colleagues who have collaborated with us in the Care for Rare project from the Berkwick University Center for Neurodiversity at Work. And they have lots of evidence-based resources in terms of organizational practice, in terms, for example, job design, line manager training, any kind of barriers to implementation, and they have everything in a layperson summary format, but also as academic pieces. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, both. It's truly fascinating, and I take as a conclusion that those adjustments would benefit everyone. I would like now to give the floor to Natalie, who is a student here at EPFL. So Natalie and I are going to have a conversation for about 20 minutes. And Natalie, you're going to share with us your story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So can you please introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
I'm a second year in master's student in chemistry. I was diagnosed with high functioning autism, which is Asperger's syndrome at age 6. And yeah, they placed me in specialized classes and through mid-school. At the end of compulsory school, I've been placed in normal classes. During high school, I was in private, and I still managed to get my Swiss federal master, which allowed me to study at EPFL, and I started EPFL in chemistry 8 years ago. So thanks to the special arrangement, I could study at my own pace, which involved taking less courses for less credits, about 15, 18 credits per semester. And yeah, that's how I did it. I will get my bachelor degree next month.
When we spoke first, you told me about, you mentioned a triple penalty. Can you tell me about the challenges that you have?
Yeah, I'm also a woman. I'm Asian, even though I was born and raised here in Lausanne. And this also my biggest struggle is to adapt socially, which means I have to blend with other students. I was also, during my studies at EPFL, I was involved in several associations. In one of them, I was assigned to the communication, even though I have some problems with communication. But at the end, I just had to send emails for news and events. And for another association, I was assigned to as a finance audit, even though I don't know nothing with it, not even going to supermarket, but it turned out just to control some budget at the end of the year.
Clara and Beat were explaining to us what makes a safe and inclusive physical environment. What kind of space do you need yourself? What kind of physical space do you need to feel safe?
I like to be an enclosed, quite small space, and quite like for instance, the bubble in the Rolex, which is behind us. And also, I like to be with the people I know very well, like the teaching section administration members, whom I can share my pains, and also I like helping people. That's why I'm also trying to have human relationship For example, at EPFL, I was involved in the coaching. I did 4 years of coaching, which means helping new students, freshmen, to integrate, to survive, to be well. And also, yeah, I would like to thank everyone who understood me, accepted me as I am, and allowed me to live among them with even though my differences.
So you're also part of the project EPFL Without Barriers. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, Sonia, she told me about that, and she even proposed to join it. I think it would be beneficial for every student and staff with difficulties, and especially students with special arrangements. So the project was launched at EPFL in the end of 2022. With about 15 persons from the project. And the goal is to meet students with physical and mental problems, to understand their difficulties, and to know what they need for their studies and for improving their life on campus. And then we try to find solutions and propose them to the EPFL management, the board of directors, whom I thank for always supporting us.
Wonderful. And so we've been talking about your challenges, and Nora was actually mentioning that there are also some kind of superpowers. What are your strengths?
Well, to remain concentrated on all tasks, which is which allows people like to pursue on through patience, and to have a social life and do something we like. And over time, we also learn to develop certain abilities, such as the art of camouflage, as mentioned in the article, the value of the perseverance, and the sense of honesty. But still, I'm terrified of looking at people's eyes, making eye contact. So to face my fear, I always try to fix on the eye of the other people, while also not actually looking at them. So I also like to have making friends. Like in my teaching the chemistry section, and I often try to make friends without knowing how, and often without success, because they didn't quite understand my difficulties. But that didn't stop me from trying again and again.
So yeah, so a sense of passion, perseverance, and honesty. You choose to share your story and your testimony with us today. Can I ask you why?
Well, yeah, because I feel it is important to spread messages to every other the neurodivergent people, and the autism, which is important to see to understand, to give them strength, be confident, and to spread awareness to everyone, to my friends, families, all of them directly involved with people with autism, ASD.
That's very inspiring. Would you have what kind of advice would you give to other students like you, or actually people working with students who identify themselves as neurodiverse?
My advice would be that you should be brave and accept your current conditions, even though it is not easy to admit. And also be sure to live with it. And you should not be ashamed by what neurodivergence. Also, be perseverant. Use your superpowers, like be concentration, and you give detail what you like. And you should know that neurodivergence means that you're different. This is not a chronic illness, though. Yeah, be reassured. And despite these differences, you can also have dreams and hope like everyone else, even though they're as high as the skies.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
So now we're going to open the floor for questions and answers. So we have about 15 minutes. And so we're going to take questions from here and also online. But first, maybe I would like to ask the first question to you, Jessica Pailly, who you are responsible for processes and regulations in the HR field here at EPFL. What is EPFL doing to create a more inclusive space, environment, and what do you want to do more of?
Maybe I should stand. Thank you very much for this question. So in terms of what is EPFL doing, I just want to highlight what the project that Nathalie already mentioned, EPFL Without Barriers, that is led by the Vice Presidency for Responsible Transformation. And the purpose is really to assess existing social and environmental barriers in order to further develop the ability of the institution to welcome its entire community under the best possible conditions. There's 7 working groups looking at all different aspects, and the plan is to do recommendations in Q1 2024. If I'm looking at Sonia, yes, to the direction to make sure that we can then look at the priorities and further develop this great work environment. I was lucky enough to be part of one of the working groups looking at employment and work, and maybe I can highlight a little bit what we want to do more of. And one of the first things that come up is trainings. So how can we really develop this awareness with our managers, but also employees, colleagues, and also the HR department? It doesn't replace having a conversation with people. It means that we need to have just a little of knowledge so we can have a great conversation. Then we talked about reasonable adjustments. And now listening to your talk, I'm just thinking, okay, we need to be very careful in how we can define this, because we don't want to have a blanket approach, because we know that each case, each person has specific individual needs. So how can we make sure that we can adapt the work environment for every individual, but also being equitable, because as an employer, we can't change everything for everybody. So this will be one of the biggest things that we need to look at. Then we also talked about how can we onboard new people just to make sure that the start at EPFL goes under the best possible conditions. And finally, when we do all of those things, we need to have this clear communication about this, making sure that everybody is aware of what's there, what's accessible, so we can also be equitable. So there is a lot of different initiatives or suggestions that we'll need to present and prioritize, but more to come.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. Maybe, Jessica, do you want to stay on stage? And then I will just, so then if people have. Yeah, that's, so if you have, so I'm just going to ask here the audience if you have any questions. Yeah, wonderful. We're going to take them 3 by 3. And also for people online, feel free to send us your questions.
Thank you. Just before the question, just one note. I find it very ironic and interesting that you've said many times that as a neurodivergent people, we're extremely sensitive to sensory stimulation. And I don't know why this place was chosen, but it was really hard to focus. But that's just a note. My question is, maybe probably to the psychologist in the panel, if you could say something about HP people who think, you know, the tree thinking, because I know It wasn't in the list of neurodivergence, but I think it is. Same thing for CPTSD, which can also cause differences in because of the neuroplasticity in the brain. If that's something that's considered, like, what do you think about? I don't know if it's an open question, but thank you.
Yeah, you're right to say that. Well, the things I put under the neurodiversity umbrella wasn't everything, right? That's why there was a little bubble of others. So high potential or just different ways of intellectual functioning would also fall under this, or sometimes when actually mental health has an impact on the neurological functioning, right? So often mental health is included in the neurodiversity umbrella. And I guess that makes it even harder to come up with well-adapted environments to all of this. So, yeah.
Yeah, hence it needs to be a relational conversation in terms of adjustments. Hence we also point out it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And hence that also requires training for everyone being comfortable to having this conversation, and needs a safe environment, psychologically safe culture. Thank you.
So I have a question then for Clara and Viet about gathering the evidence base. If we say that these adjustments need to be very specific to the specific needs of a person, how do you then design an empirical study that tests for it at such a fine grain, but also allows you to make large grain recommendations?
Yeah, these are methodological challenges. It's also the question of having good assessments. And it's also a bit scarce. But of course, neurodivergence are, let's say, 10% of all work, of all people are neurodivergent. So there is a possibility to do a big scale thing. But of course, it has to be financed. And it has to be very much controlled. But it is not more difficult than in any other controlled studies. It's difficult, you're right. But at least physical adjustments, you can account, you can see, you can get the impact.
I have a question to the same two persons, if I may. And Jessica, maybe you can say something if you want to. At EPFL, there is this project, Future at Work, that also implies more open space or desk sharing workspaces. And we actually, my unit, we are also moved into one. And I was really interested about these different kind of diverse environments that you designed in this. And I think to some degree the place we transferred to has part of what you're showing, and I actually feel it is really necessary. Partly it was by chance that we had one separate office that is now used in a way it wasn't actually intended to, or not only in the way it was intended to. And I feel all the benefit of these diverse spaces, also a space that is really designed for social interaction. And even though there's not so much going on there, I personally also feel how precious I find it, just because it gives a signal that we are not only here to work, that we can also just... So, yeah, I would like to know, maybe can you say a little bit more about what evidence there is, what guidelines there are, or how maybe the project you're working on or you're trying to studies on.
Yeah, thank you very much. So these design guidelines, as I said, we still have to, the usefulness needs to be tested. There basically, some of them are based on a newer concept of open plan, which is called activity-based working, where you select zones in the environment that match your preference at the moment, whether that's highly sensory stimulating or not, whether that is very quiet, so for concentrated work. And this kind of, that's a starting ground. So these are kind of office concepts that are now on vogue to a certain extent, and they have been built up upon. And to add on creating really truly hypersensitivity and hypersensitive environmental settings. But the question is really, we need to test those and and also then redesign those with a participatory design framework. And there are certain kind of blueprints about going about this. And there's a keyword, universal design. That's a principle from the US. So we should make use of that. But as I said, it's the starting now of the conversation. We are very gladly to work closely with the Center for Neurodiversity at Work, who are mostly focusing on occupational health and job design elements and psychosocial adjustments. And we are trying to bring into the environmental design. But it's all starting.
And maybe there is also a question of conscious. Do we always choose a good environment to work well? Is it not that we're just a bit lazy and even if there are different possibilities, do we always notice what is good for us, what is a good environment? And when we have headache, then we realize, oh, this was too loud. Or when I suddenly feel, oh, I didn't speak to anybody this whole day. What happened to me? Suddenly, so we are also not very aware how environment influence our work attitude, and we don't get enough support from employers that they say you should change, you are encouraged to use these things. So it's a whole work culture that we address with this.
Jessica, would you like to add something on EPFL?
I think they said it all.
Perfect. Anyone else? Questions? Checking online. Okay, I see no questions online. So, well, we're coming. Yes, please.
It has been mentioned by several of you, but I actually also noted it at the very beginning, and it's a question to you, Nathalie. So, if you agree, can you say how you, because the environment there is noise from the cafeteria, so how did you adjust to this? What did it, if you agree to tell us how you managed to still stay here, being focused with us, how did you manage to do this?
So yeah, to manage to keep concentrated, I just look at the people, what's happening over here, and just create one's own bubble to stay inside. Yeah, even though it's really noisy, but it doesn't always work as they just laughing too loud. I cannot have this bubble, but I have quite solid bubble around me, so yeah.
Just following that question, for example, was it easier for you to follow some courses online or via videos rather than being here, or on the contrary, you prefer to be still here?
It is easier to follow a course online, as I can have enclosed space. I have some earphones plugged in, and it is easier to concentrate. Yeah, and my door was closed too. In person, it's yeah, it was when there's some renovating. When a campus is renovating, there's some geo noise. So yeah, sometimes the teacher has to stop talking. Yeah, it is hard to be concentrated when there's work, renovation, or happening around.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for these questions. I think a lot of us were wondering how you were living it. I have no questions online, no more questions from the room. So we're coming at the end of our event. Thanks again. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. I did take some final conclusions about, I feel it's quite easy and it's quite common sense. Unfortunately, it's not, common sense doesn't seem to be so common to create this inclusive workplace that you were mentioning. And yeah, so thanks again. Thanks for coming. Our panelists are still here for a few minutes if you want to speak with them individually. And have a good afternoon.
Hello, I just want to take this occasion to